Here's the secret they don't want you to know. When an avoidant and you ignore each other, the game changes.
At first, it feels like silence, like nothing is happening. But it's not nothing. It's the moment the avoidant realizes they no longer have the control they were used to having. They don't need you to be present to feel powerful. In fact, that's the point. Their entire identity is built around distance, detachment, and the illusion of emotional freedom. They act like they don't care. They act like you're replaceable. But the truth is, they need your attention to feel alive. They need you to chase. They need you to question. They need you to show up, because their power is fueled by your presence. When you both go silent, that's when the real battle starts. And it's not a battle you can see from the outside. It happens in the shadows, behind the scenes, in the empty spaces where they once had you. Because avoidants don't lose their grip when you walk away. They don't crumble like a typical narcissist would. They don't beg or plead or try to win you back with grand gestures. Instead, they retreat even deeper into themselves. They disappear, they vanish, and that disappearance is their weapon. It creates uncertainty, it creates confusion, it creates a sense of instability that pulls you back in, even when you don't want to return. The insane part is that your silence becomes the mirror they didn't know they needed. When you stop chasing, they begin to notice things, not because they suddenly care, but because they suddenly feel the absence of control. Their ego is triggered. They begin to ask questions they've never asked before. They start checking your profile. They start asking mutual friends about you. They begin to watch your life from a distance, like a predator observing prey. And it's not love. It's not regret. It's not longing. It's the desperate need to know if they still matter. The avoidance fear is not losing you. Their fear is needing you. And your silence exposes that fear in the most brutal way. Because now they have to face the fact that you don't belong to them anymore. You're not available on demand. You're not there to validate their ego. And in that moment, they start to feel something they can't tolerate: vulnerability. That's why the invisible war begins. Not because you both hate each other, but because the truth is finally stepping into the light. Your silence is breaking the pattern, and the pattern is fighting back. The avoidance mindset: they think they're winning, they act like they're detached, but inside, they're panicking. That line is the whole truth. Avoidants are masters at wearing a mask of calm, at appearing like they are untouchable, like they are above emotional attachment. They want you to believe they're unaffected by your absence, your silence, your boundaries, your withdrawal. They want you to think they're winning by staying distant, but the reality is they're not winning at all. They're surviving. They're not thriving. They're not strong. They're terrified. Avoidants don't fear losing you. They fear needing you. That's the twist that nobody understands. Their entire system is built around avoiding the feeling of need, because need equals vulnerability. Vulnerability equals weakness. Weakness equals loss of control, and control is their drug. So when you ignore them, when you stop responding, when you stop chasing, when you stop being the emotional outlet they secretly rely on, they interpret it as control slipping away, and that triggers the worst fear an avoidant can experience: not being in charge. Their ego doesn't know how to handle not being in charge. Because avoidants are not just avoidant, they are avoidant with a strategy. They don't just distance themselves emotionally, they distance themselves to maintain superiority. They keep their walls up so they never have to admit they need someone. They keep their distance so they never have to face the truth, that they crave connection just as much as anyone else. When you go silent, it hits them like a silent alarm. The room gets quiet, and suddenly they're not the one controlling the energy. They can't predict your next move. They can't read your patterns. They can't manipulate the situation. That's when their mind starts running in circles. They begin to replay every moment you were there. Every time you made yourself available, every time you forgave them, every time you lowered your guard. Their pride tells them to act unaffected. Their fear tells them to react. And that internal conflict creates a kind of panic that they hide with coldness, with arrogance, with I don't care energy. But beneath that surface, they're spiraling. This is why avoidants are so dangerous in relationships. They don't show you their panic. They show you their control. And when you think you're losing them, that's when they start to feel the most powerful. Because power, to them, is the ability to leave without consequence. But when you ignore them, you remove that ability. You take away their escape route. You force them to face the part of themselves they've been avoiding. And that's where the truth becomes inevitable. They're not actually winning, they're just pretending. They're not detached, they're desperate. The narcissistic trigger. Your silence is a threat. Your silence is not just silence. It's a threat to their identity. This is where the narcissistic trigger appears. Avoidants are secretly addicted to being needed. They may never say it out loud. They may never admit it, even to themselves. But the truth is that they feed on the energy of being desired, pursued, and emotionally chased. It validates their worth. It proves they still matter. It proves they still have power. And your silence removes that validation. It makes them question their entire identity, because they have built their self-image around being emotionally unavailable while still being emotionally wanted. Your silence triggers a deep fear. What if they move on? That fear is not just a fleeting thought. It becomes a dangerous obsession. It becomes a quiet panic that sits in the back of their mind. Because if you move on, it proves something they cannot accept, that their avoidance is not a strength. It proves that their distance actually destroys connection. It proves that their inability to commit, to communicate, to show up, to be consistent, is not something that can be ignored forever, and the avoidant cannot tolerate that truth. Their ego cannot survive the possibility that they were the problem. That fear is the exact moment the avoidant starts reacting, not out of love, not out of care, but out of self-preservation. They begin to monitor your life like a detective. They start to look for signs that you're still available. They want proof that you're still in the same emotional orbit. And when they don't find it, their panic turns into action. But their action will never look like a sincere apology or genuine love. It will look like manipulation disguised as casual conversation. It will look like sudden charm. It will look like, I'm fine, I'm good, I've been busy energy. It will look like the avoidant version of hoovering, not begging, not pleading, not showing vulnerability, but reappearing in your life like a shadow. Because avoidants don't come back with clarity, they come back with ambiguity. They will test your reaction. They will push your boundaries. They will attempt to regain control by making you question your own feelings. And that is the most dangerous part. They don't just want you back, they want to prove they can still have you. They want to prove you're still there for them, even when they don't deserve you. They want to prove that your silence didn't break you. That's why they act like they don't care. That's why they pretend they're unaffected. Because if they admit you hurt them, if they admit they miss you, if they admit they fear losing you, they will have to admit they're not invincible. And avoidance will do anything to avoid that. So when an avoidant reacts to your silence, don't mistake it for love. Don't mistake it for growth. It's not a breakthrough. It's a defense. It's a survival mechanism. And the truth is, you don't have to engage. You don't have to respond. You don't have to validate their panic. Because the moment you validate it, you give them back the power they lost. And the moment you refuse to give it back, you become the one thing they cannot control, someone who is not afraid to leave. The insane shift, they start observing you. Watch closely, because when you stop chasing, they start watching. That is the moment the avoidant's true nature begins to reveal itself. When you were constantly available, they could pretend they didn't care. They could act indifferent and maintain the illusion of emotional freedom. But the moment you stop chasing, stop responding, stop validating their behavior, the dynamic shifts. Suddenly they realize you are no longer there to be used as an emotional outlet. Suddenly they realize they are not the ones holding the power, and that is when they begin observing you, not because they suddenly love you, but because they suddenly fear losing you. They begin checking your social media like a silent observer, scanning your posts, your stories, your likes, your comments. It's not curiosity, it's not interest. It's a calculated move to see if you're still available. They want to know if you're still in the same place, emotionally. They want to know if you've moved on. They want to know if your life is continuing without them. Because if your life continues without them, it proves something they can't handle, that you don't need them. And if you don't need them, then their distance wasn't a strength. It was a weakness. They start asking mutual friends about you too. They don't ask because they genuinely care. They ask because they want information. They want confirmation. They want to measure your emotional status. And that is where the avoidance manipulation begins to show itself. They will act like it's casual, like they're just checking in. But the truth is, they're trying to see if the emotional leash is still attached. They're trying to see if you're still tethered to them in some way, because avoidants are addicted to control. And when you go silent, you cut the leash. You remove the connection. You become unreachable. And that scares them. They want to know if you're still available. Not because they want to be with you, but because they want to know if they still have the option. They want to know if they can still return to you, if they ever feel the need to, because avoidants are not looking for stability. They're looking for a backup. They want to keep you as a safety net in case the world becomes too overwhelming. That's the hidden truth. And when you stop chasing, they begin to realize you're not just a person to them. You're a plan. You're a strategy. You're a safety mechanism. And once they recognize that, they begin to watch you like a predator watching prey. The hoovering begins, but it's different. Unlike a narcissist, avoidants don't hoover with love. They hoover with distance. That's the truth. Narcissists hoover with charm, with apologies, with fake vulnerability, with dramatic confessions and emotional storms. Avoidants don't do that. They don't come back with tears. They don't beg. They don't confess. They don't perform. They don't fall apart. Instead, they hoover with silence, with absence, with subtlety, with a cold reappearance that feels like a shadow passing through your life. Their hoovering is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's sneaky, and it's far more dangerous because it can make you question your own sanity. They will just appear in your life like a shadow. One day you'll be living your life, moving on, healing, building your self-worth, and then suddenly they're there. Not with a grand apology, not with a heartfelt confession, not with a promise to change, just a message that seems harmless. A casual, "Hey," a random, "How are you?" A comment on your story, a like on your post. A sudden reappearance that feels like a ghost returning to haunt you. And that is how avoidants hoover, that they don't come back to fix what they broke. They come back to see if you're still there. They come back to test your boundaries. They come back to see if you still care. This is where people get trapped again, because the avoidance return feels like a miracle. It feels like hope. It feels like proof that they missed you. But it's not. It's a test. It's a way to re-establish control without ever having to admit they were wrong. Avoidants hate being wrong. They hate being vulnerable. So they avoid the conversation altogether. They avoid accountability. They avoid clarity. And they use your emotions as a way to regain their sense of power. Because the moment you respond, the moment you show interest, the moment you let them back in, you give them what they wanted in the first place. Proof that you still belong to them. And that's the scary part. Avoidants don't need you to love them. They need you to be available. They need you to be reachable. They need you to be someone they can return to whenever the world gets too heavy. That's the addiction. That's the pattern. And that's why their hoovering is so quiet. It's not about drama. It's about security. It's about keeping you on standby. It's about ensuring that no matter what happens, they always have someone to lean on. And the moment you realize that, The moment you see the truth behind their silence and their reappearance, you understand the real meaning of the word avoidant. The avoidance ego tries to regain control. Suddenly they remember everything you did for them. But it's not love, it's control. That is the moment the avoidance ego begins to stir. When you were constantly chasing, constantly giving, constantly trying to prove your worth, they were safe. They were protected from vulnerability because they never had to face the truth. They were emotionally dependent on you. But when you go silent, when you stop giving them that emotional safety net, their mind starts searching for a way to regain what they lost. And that search always leads back to the same place: control. They begin to miss you as a concept, not as a person. They don't miss your laughter. They don't miss your touch. They don't miss your presence. They miss the idea of you. They miss the version of you that existed to make them feel superior. They miss the version of you that would bend, forgive, and chase. They miss the version of you that would always be there, waiting for them to return. That's not love. That's a craving for power. It's the ego trying to convince itself that they can still win the game, that they can still dominate the situation without ever having to admit they were wrong. Their pride becomes the voice of regret. They won't say, "I'm sorry." They won't say, "I miss you." They won't admit they were distant or cruel. Instead, their pride finds a way to sound like regret without actually being vulnerable. They'll say things like, "I don't know why I keep pushing people away." They'll say, "I've been thinking about you lately." They'll say, "I guess I didn't realize what I had." These words aren't an apology. They're a manipulation tactic. They're designed to make you believe they've changed while keeping their emotional armor intact. Because if they actually admitted they were wrong, it would mean they were weak. And avoidance can't stand being weak. They need to prove they can still win. That's the truth. Because avoidants don't view relationships as a partnership. They view them as a stage. They view them as a performance. They view them as a system where they can always exit when things get too intense. And when you remove the exit, when you remove the emotional escape route, they feel trapped. They feel threatened. Their mind goes into survival mode, and the only way they know how to survive is to regain control. They start trying to manipulate the situation so that they can feel like the winner again. They begin to test you. They begin to push boundaries. They begin to act like they don't care. But they do. They care more than they want to admit. They care because your silence is a direct attack on their identity. You feel confused because it's not consistent. They don't come back with clarity. They come back with chaos. That's the most painful part of dealing with an avoidant. They don't come back with a clear message. They don't come back with an explanation. They don't come back with a promise. They come back with confusion, inconsistency, and chaos. One day, they ignore you. They act like you never mattered. They disappear without warning, leaving you in the dark. You start to question yourself. You start to doubt your worth. You start to wonder if you imagined everything. And then, out of nowhere, they act like nothing happened. The next day, they act like nothing happened. They send a casual message. They like your post. They comment on your story. They appear as if you were never gone. As if the silence was just a phase. As if you were just being dramatic. That inconsistency is their weapon. It keeps you unstable. It keeps you guessing. It keeps you attached, because your brain starts to search for meaning. It starts to try to decode the pattern. It starts to analyze every word, every action, every silence. And in that analysis, you become trapped. You become addicted to the hope that one day they will stay. But that hope is exactly what they want, because it means they still have power over you. They still control your emotions. They still control your thoughts. They still control your self-esteem, and that is why avoidants behave this way. They don't want a stable relationship. They want the illusion of a connection, without the responsibility. They want to keep you close enough to feel safe, but far enough to avoid vulnerability. They want to have you on standby. They want to keep you as a backup plan, and your confusion is their fuel. When you don't know where you stand, you keep trying to earn a place. You keep trying to prove your worth. You keep trying to win back what you already lost. And the avoidant watches this happen with a calm detachment that feels like a knife in your chest. They don't need to chase you. They don't need to fight for you. They don't need to show you love. They just need to stay unpredictable, because unpredictability keeps you loyal to the idea of them. It keeps you waiting, it keeps you hoping, and it keeps them safe from emotional exposure. That's the cruel truth. Avoidants don't want clarity because clarity would force them to be honest, and honesty would force them to be vulnerable, and vulnerability would force them to lose control. So they choose chaos instead. They choose inconsistency. They choose silence. They choose emotional withdrawal. And they do it because they are terrified of what happens when they finally have to face the truth, that they might actually want you. The insane truth. You becoming unreachable breaks their pattern. Here's the insane part. Your silence doesn't punish them. It exposes them. That's the moment the avoidance entire strategy collapses. You may think your silence is a punishment. You may think it's a way to make them feel the same pain they caused you. But the truth is, your silence doesn't hurt them the way you imagine. It doesn't make them regret their actions. It doesn't make them feel your absence the way you feel theirs. Instead, your silence exposes them. It exposes the fact that they never truly had control in the first place. It exposes the fact that their emotional distance was not strength, but insecurity. It exposes the fact that they were never the powerful one in the relationship. You were. You were the one who cared. You were the one who loved. You were the one who showed up. And now, when you stop, the illusion falls apart. They can't control you anymore. That's the real fear. Because avoidants rely on control to maintain their emotional safety. They need to know you're reachable, available, and predictable. They need to know that no matter how far they pull away, you'll always come back. They need that guarantee. It gives them the freedom to act without consequences. But when you become unreachable, when you stop responding, when you stop chasing, when you stop showing up, their safety net disappears. They no longer have the comfort of knowing they can return whenever they feel the need. And that loss of control triggers something deeper than anger. It triggers panic. They can't predict you anymore. That is the most terrifying part for an avoidant. Predictability is their anchor. It gives them the illusion of emotional stability without emotional involvement. When they can predict your reactions, they can stay emotionally distant without feeling guilty. But when you become unpredictable, when you become unreachable, their world begins to shift. Their mind starts to race. They start to question everything they've been telling themselves. They start to wonder if they were wrong. They start to wonder if they actually lost something real. And that uncertainty is more painful to them than losing you. And that scares them more than losing you. Because losing you would be simple. Losing you would mean they can move on without emotional consequences. But being forced to face the truth of their own emotional limitations is something they cannot tolerate. It means admitting they're not as strong as they pretend to be. It means admitting they're not immune to attachment. It means admitting they're not invincible. And avoidance would rather lose you than face that reality. So instead of accepting it, they do what they always do. They retreat into denial. They rebuild their walls. They reconstruct their story, and they try to regain the illusion of control. The avoidant will try to rewrite reality. They'll start telling themselves stories so they don't feel guilty. This is the moment the avoidant begins to rewrite the past. They cannot accept responsibility for what happened because responsibility would mean vulnerability. And vulnerability would mean weakness, so they create new narratives that make them feel justified. They will start telling themselves things like, "I never loved them." They will say, "They were too intense." They will convince themselves, "I just needed space." These are lies to protect their ego. These are stories they tell themselves so they can avoid feeling guilty, because guilt is a feeling they can't handle. It would force them to change, and avoidants hate change. They hate growth. They hate the idea that they might need to become a different person to maintain a relationship. They will rewrite your memories. They will start to remember the relationship differently. They will exaggerate your flaws. They will downplay their own behavior. They will turn your love into neediness. They will turn your loyalty into clinginess. They will turn your patience into weakness. And they will do this without even realizing it, because the avoidant mind is built on self-protection. It's built avoiding emotional discomfort, and rewriting reality is the easiest way to avoid discomfort. If they can convince themselves that you are the problem, then they never have to admit they were wrong. They never have to face the fact that they hurt you. They never have to feel the consequences of their actions. And that is the most dangerous part of being involved with an avoidant. You may think you are over them, and then suddenly you hear their story. You hear them speak about you like you were the villain. You hear them talk about the relationship as if you were the one who caused the distance, and it feels like a slap in the face. It feels like they are erasing your pain. It feels like they are rewriting your reality. And the worst part is, they may even believe their own lies. That's how deeply they need to protect their ego. That's how deeply they need to avoid guilt. They don't want to be seen as the person who hurt someone they once claimed to care about. So they rewrite the story until they can look at themselves in the mirror without flinching. This is why it's so important to stay grounded in your truth. Don't let their rewritten story become your reality. Don't let their lies convince you that your love was a mistake. Don't let their denial make you doubt your own experience. Because the truth is simple. You were real. You were present. You were vulnerable. You were open. And they were not. They were emotionally unavailable. They were avoidant. They were distant. And when you became unreachable, their pattern was exposed. That's the insane truth. And that's why they will try to rewrite everything. Because the moment your truth exists, their illusion falls apart. Final truth. Silence is the ultimate test. When you ignore each other, the truth comes out. Not about them, but about who you really are. And that is the final truth that no one wants to admit. When the noise stops, when the chasing stops, when the emotional drama fades away, what remains is the real version of you. Not the version who was desperate for their attention. Not the version who was constantly trying to prove their worth. Not the version who was trying to fix someone who didn't want to be fixed. The silence strips everything down to the core. It reveals what you were truly made of. It reveals your strength, your value, your boundaries, your self-respect, and most importantly, it reveals your power. You discover your own power, not the kind of power that comes from control or manipulation, not the kind of power that comes from making someone chase you, the kind of power that comes from knowing your worth without needing validation, the kind of power that comes from choosing yourself, even when it hurts. Because when you stop responding to the avoidance games, you are not punishing them. You are proving something to yourself. You are proving that your peace matters more than their attention. You are proving that you can survive without their approval. And that is true power. You realize you weren't being too much. That was the lie you told yourself to survive. You told yourself you were too intense, too emotional, too sensitive, too attached. You told yourself that the problem was you because it was easier than facing the truth. That the problem was them. That they were incapable of meeting you where you were. That they were unable to show up, communicate, commit, and love you fully. When the silence reveals the truth, you see that your love was not a flaw. Your vulnerability was not a weakness. Your emotions were not a burden. You were simply human, and you were trying to be loved like a human. You realize you were just human, and that is the most liberating truth of all. Because being human means you have needs. Being human means you crave connection. Being human means you want to be seen, heard, and valued. Being human means you deserve someone who chooses you without hesitation. The avoidant may have made you doubt that. They may have made you question your worth. They may have made you feel like your heart was too much to handle. But silence brings clarity. Silence strips away the illusions. Silence shows you that you weren't broken. You were simply in a relationship with someone who couldn't love you in the way you needed. And once you understand that, you no longer need their approval to feel complete. You no longer need their attention to feel worthy. You no longer need their inconsistent presence to feel loved. Because the truth is, silence is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the moment you finally choose yourself. It is the moment you stop chasing what was never meant to be caught. And it is the moment you step into your power, your worth, and your freedom.